Here's a quick look into today's episode.
Young soldiers and young leaders, surround yourself with people that like talking about your craft and are serious. It's those relationships that you build around the culture of the Army and like-minded people.
Be conservative here and say one of the top 3 quotes I've ever heard in my life was, when I'm with you guys, this is from one Brian Burlingame, and I'm paraphrasing, when I'm with you guys, everything is right. The world is right. And that, I'm going to tell you something, man. You got to, it's getting me a little chilly thinking about it, but when somebody says that to you, that's so humbling. It also puts a lot of pressure on somebody too, because I'm like, shit, I gotta live up to that, man.
This episode is with Brian Burlingame and George Sterling. This is going to be another long one. This one's going to be about being the most reliable, dependable teammate. It's going to be about relationships. They're going to talk about surrounding yourself with people that share your passions and your calling. They'll talk about why they joined, why they stayed, and give some advice on how to achieve balance in your life. Both Brian and George served over 30 years and are still making a difference. Both enlisted in the Army and the Marines. Both became officers. Brian went to West Point, became a doctor. George became a Green Beret. The similarities yet unique paths that the 3 of us have combined us to become some of the closest friends, and we've learned so much from each other. I hope you enjoy today's conversation. So, when we talk through that game plan of, how we kind of see this going down, first, I think it's important for people to understand, who are you two guys? You two guys, I couldn't go much further in doing this podcast series if I didn't have 2 of the people that have influenced both my life and my career as much as you two. It's impossible to take 21 years and condense it into, an hour to an hour and a half long conversation of all the things that you guys have taught me. But when people said, how did you learn some of the things that you learned, Matt? There's so many nuances and so many conversations that the 3 of us have had with all of our other boys, with Jeff Roberts and folks, and all of our wives and the Sterling games and the things that we have done that have built, my life into what it is. And I felt like I couldn't possibly go much further without having you two guys say a few things and people to kind of get a glimpse of some of the things that I have learned from you guys. George, what are the things that you want people to feel when they think George Sterling?
I talked to Lisa about it, because that's an important thing, and of course it's what I want and what results from it. I don't know, right? To boil it down, I'm fiercely loyal. I think I put the work in, but I still had fun, and so I think it sort of boils it down. And I want somebody, when my name's mentioned in a professional or a social context, it's more of, in the professional one, I want them to know, yeah, he was dependable. He put work in. And on top of that, he kept it real. And he always found ways to make it fun. So I'm hoping that applies as well, on the social side, in the sense that I give that impression. And you guys should hopefully attest to this, using our favorite quote, when the chips are down, that's when you don't get going, or whatever the hell Hunter said that day, man. Yeah, but I'm just I think you guys recognize that, if you needed me on that wall, I'd be there. So
hell yeah. For folks that don't know George, you were already a major when I met you. You were a major and I was a second lieutenant. I lived across the street from Brian, and all of our kids were about the same age. So we got to know each other, one through our families and our wives. But you guys were majors when I was a second lieutenant. Age-wise, you guys were a couple years older than me, but you guys were like my big brothers, instantly when our families started to get together. So be game. When people hear your name, what are some of the things you want them to feel?
Yeah. So before I start, I tell you, loyalty is the trait that I think I value the most, understanding there's different hierarchies of loyalty. And so, George, I just want to tell you that when I think of you, that's what I think of. So what you want to put off is kind of what comes to my mind. I've known you for, 20 2 years, 23 years now, give or take. So you're putting that down. Well, I think of what I want my family to think of, my friends, my patients, my colleagues, and my military peers. And there may be specific nuances to what I want them to think, but to kind of boil it down, I think it all comes to one thing for me, and that's reliability. I want people to think of me as being reliable. Another way of saying dependable. And I think the way it crosses over is much like George, I'm a fan of putting in hard work. So I want folks to see me as skilled in what I do, and that I'm willing to do the work that needs to get done to be reliable.
Yeah, one of the things I love about multiple episodes now and a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds is folks will start to see and hear the same things coming out of folks. And what you guys are screaming is being the utmost teammate, being somebody that can be counted on, and we all want to be surrounded by somebody that's skilled, that has the same values, that has the same character, believes in the same things that we believe. And when you guys use the words loyalty and reliable, all I think about is teammates like you.
I want to make sure up front, and this is for us, but it's mentors, right? And I think about mentors in the military, and yes, there's a lot of good people, but mentors, to me, I probably say two. The other two are you two. So when it comes to mentorship, I want you guys to know, if we're getting deep here, is that I don't apply that term very 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 often. And yes, I do use the cliche of teach, coach, mentor, that kind of thing. But when it comes to me and who I think is a mentor, it's the friendship that we've had, right? And have. And you two, and yeah, Matt, you're younger than me, and you were a second lieutenant. I was a major. But as I learned you and developed that relationship with you, and subsequently Brian, I, you guys were as instrumental as my wife, to be brutally honest, in making me understand how to be a good human. And I want you guys to make sure you know that. I'm sure I've told you that before when we were drinking beers, or Brian was drinking a damn cocktail, but nevertheless, man, that's an important thing, because I thought through this stuff, and I thought, mentors, who can I give that title to? And I give it to you two. I tell you that, man. I mean that with all sincerity, but for this, I mean, for real, because it's I've learned, and I continue to learn from the both of you.
Yeah.
And Matt, you're more out there in the social world and all of that than Brian is. So I watch what you do as you've grown into this, now rank of colonel. But and I continue to learn, and I continue to see some of the things that I wished I had done when I was your age, right? But Brian's not as I guess out there or public facing as you are. But Brian, you're just the simple intellectual pursuits, or the rigor, or whatever the hell it is. I'm telling you, man, I've it's been instrumental in my life, and that's a fact. And it's made me, want to strive to truly understand, everything in detail, and not be a bumper sticker. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I want to put that out there, since we're getting all like mushy here, man. I just want you guys to know that, right?
Yeah.
So.
And this is the most mushy George will probably ever get, for anybody that's out there. The fact that he's taken this much time to sit there and talk about his thoughts. We used to philosophize. Sit there philosophizing, usually over the grill or over a drink, or in the backyard or something like that.
Hey, Matt, I think what George just said is hugely important. And part of the things that make people stay in the Army. If you could highlight that. We talk about teamwork and camaraderie, and I know that we're all going to talk about it, because that's kind of the theme of today and where we're likely going to go with our individual and collective answers. But it's those relationships that you build around the culture of the Army, and you already mentioned it, like-minded people. And it isn't that you're like-minded and that you approach every problem or every situation the same way, but the values are the same, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's our families are all tight, and I love both of your wives and your children, to include Trey. even though I went to the Naval Academy. Uh, but what I'm saying is that there's not two dudes I'd rather hang out with on any given day than you guys, right? And we all have other friends that we like, but it's just that sustains you, right? When you're having a bad day with your family, when you're having a bad day at work, that umbrella of the things that make it worth the lifestyle is having people like you in it. So I think George's point is is hugely important to why people stay in the Army, and why the job is so fulfilling.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that. The probably the one of the most, if not, I'm just going to be conservative here and say one of the top three quotes I've ever heard in my life was, "When I'm with you guys." This is from one Brian Burlingame. And I'm paraphrasing. "When I'm with you guys, everything is right. The world is right. And that, I'm gonna tell you something, man. You got to. And it's getting me a little chilly thinking about it. But when somebody says that to you, that's so humbling. And not to put you on the spot, B, but it also puts a lot of pressure on somebody too. Because I'm like, shit, I gotta live up to that, man. And that's a good thing, though. You want to be able to live up to that. You want to be able to be that guy, like we talked about, dependability, camaraderie. We want to be able to be there for our boys, our people, and like we pay lip service, fiercely loyal, and I think I am, but nevertheless, back to the thing, B, are we putting the work in for it? Do we deserve that quote? And I think, yes, but it's a continual thing. You can't be complacent with it, right? You got to recognize that when that dude said that, he meant it from his heart. And so you got to live up to it, man. And that goes back to the mentorship thing, so it all ties back, but go ahead. Yeah.
No, I think our enterprise, if you want to call it that, the military, the DOD, soft, specific, I think it transcends all of that. But I think our enterprise fosters those relationships. I'd almost say it requires it in order to be healthy, unlike some other enterprises in the civilian sector. And we'll probably hit on that, when we get later on in the talk.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I echo the same thing, to where it was unmistakable when I met you guys, that I was going to learn from you, and not just about Army stuff, but I'm talking about like how to be a dad, how to raise your kids, how to make decisions, how to raise your family, where do you go to church, everything, right? From that I was learning from you guys. And what I was learning through wasn't, you standing in the backyard and reciting, Chaucer out in front of me. It was simply through demonstration. It was the way that you lived your life. It was the way, George, you got up every morning and you did PT. Like, you've been doing that since the day I met you. And so when people say, like, where'd you come up with, like, no days off, Matt? Like, I learned by watching George. And when, yeah, there it is, right there.
Gun show.
And it was like, if you want to be healthy as you get older in life, you've got to be doing a little bit of something every day, right? You got to be out there doing some form of cardio. You got to be out there doing, some kind of work. And so I learned these things from you guys, from the beginning. You're like unmistakable. And then all those times of us being together, it was just brick after brick after brick that started to build this foundation of, the friendship that we have. So when you say like mentorship, George, like I feel the same way. It's like there's people out there that are coaches. There's people that have out there that have provided me with advice over the years. But like mentorship is when you're having a tough day or you got a big decision that you need to make. Like, who do you reach out to? And because they know all the months and weeks and all the other conversations, all the other variables that they know you're applying to making that decision. Before we go too far, what I do want to talk about, just to kind of, because people don't know who Brian is, who's George, right? They're like, these are the two people that come to my changes of command. They sit in the chair. They're very quiet. George isn't quiet. Brian is. But when you guys show up, most of the people that are there, they're like, I don't know who these two guys are, right? And they don't understand how important you are in life and the things that you've done, both in life, but for the military. I could sit here for hours and talk about the things that the two of you have done rather than, go through those bios, because you both did 30 years, right? You both retired 30 years in the Army and maybe a little bit after that. And so between the three of us, we have 90 years of service between the three of us right now, just speaking. And then everything you guys have done since then, right? But let's kind of go back to and quickly go through it. But like, why did you join in the first place? And why did you stay? So those are probably two different reasons. But like, let's go with B Game. Like, why did you join? Because I really want to get at like you talk about why you joined, why West Point, and then why did you stay a few years later?
Yeah, I'll give you the logical answer, and I won't put out in the universe the real knee-jerk answer in the moment. But the logical answer is, I looked around. I was in high school, my last year in high school. I had a couple acceptances to colleges. The one school I really wanted to go to had turned me down, and I had a ROTC scholarship as well. And one of my good friends essentially failed out of school, and it was a little scary. I mean, and I asked him, I thought maybe he was partying and that sort of stuff. He's like, I just wasn't ready. And my mom and dad didn't have a lot of means, and I did not want to go to school and waste their money. And I wasn't sure that I was ready for school, even though I think I was fairly, together. I wasn't out partying. I wasn't so, my mom and dad didn't have a lot of money, and I didn't want to waste their money. And so I realized I needed some time to grow up. I needed some time to get focused. And so the Army was a place I thought, again, there'd be discipline and there'd be structure. And I think I needed that. And I think, honestly, some nations have that as a prerequisite, right? You've got to do some obligate service. I think that would be great, though I don't know how we would support that in our country. But I feel very blessed to have grown at the expense of Uncle Sam, right? He paid for my maturity. And so that's why I joined the Army. Going to West Point, it was, I'm going down to get some, like a lot. I think a lot of us that age just sort of stumble on. We'd like to think there's some grand 5-year plan, but when we're 18, 19, 20, we're just trying to make good decisions. And then if the pathway is going this way, we're happy with it. And if we're fortunate, if it's going the wrong way, we pull pitch and don't go down a blind alley. But unfortunately, some people do. And so I was lucky, just kind of going with the flow. I had opportunities that came up, and I was smart enough to recognize this is an opportunity. So I'm at the Ed Center to get some classes to start doing some college as a young private. And there's a flyer saying, hey, there's some dude from West Point Prep coming. Do you want to, show up for that? I'm like, oh, okay. So I go to the thing, and it's interesting. And then I thought about it in terms of, I knew at that point already, having only been in the Army for a very short period of time, that I liked what I was doing and the people I was doing it with. And it was something that I said, I'd rather do this than go to a civilian university and be some other profession. I like being a soldier. I like the sense of purpose, and I love the teamwork, right? We're all sports guys. And most military guys are, not all, but we're all team sports guys. And so the Army is a team sport. And so, as anything in the DoD is a team sport. And so I like that aspect of it. And I said, you know what? 3 hots in a cot. Let me stay around here for a while. And so the next step was, going to West Point to get an education. I remember, sitting down in the interview, and the guy said, well, hey, why do you want to be an officer versus an NCO? Now, we all lead, and there's no difference. But I thought at that time, rightly or wrongly, is that being an officer was going to give me an opportunity to have a little bit more of an impact. But more importantly, even at that young age, I knew that I craved responsibility, and I wanted to have more responsibility. And as I've gotten older, that sense has never gone away. If anything, it's just gotten stronger. And I think, I look at George and I look at you, and it's the same thing. When given an opportunity to lead, follow, or get the hell out of the way, you guys are going to lead every time. And that requires, again, that sense of wanting the responsibility. I had a phrase when I was the command surgeon over at JSOC, and I would say it to guys every time when they went out the door. I would say, winners want the ball. right? And so that's kind of that sense of craving responsibility. When it comes down to the last second, do you want to take the shot, right? Or, are you the guy that's happy throwing the block? So, and again, they're all important, but where do you want to be in the spectrum? So that led me to West Point, not knowing that it was going to deliver that, but, that was sort of the way to go. It wasn't some grand idea. It was just, yeah, this seems to be the right thing to do. Then after that, had a lot of other decisions to make, but that was sort of the theme. When given an option to do something, if it seemed like, yeah, this makes sense, that's what I would do. And I fell into a lot of things. I think, to be honest, very much like probably George will articulate, and even your career, there's a lot of happy coincidences, right? A lot of, in hindsight, great decisions that in the moment were like, yeah, I was just doing what I was told, right? So, and so that's what got me in the Army. What made me stay? All the things I just talked about, and ultimately, at the inflection point where I probably could have left or would have started again. As being a physician, the Army's a great place to be. But prior to 9/11, there was other things, right? So 9/11 occurs, and that I was a mid career guy, and that cements it, right? I'm not leaving. I'm not leaving the Army because it's game day. I hear some people say, well, why don't you do this, that, and the other thing? It's like, I didn't go to doctor school for 4 years and go to a surgical residency to then sit on the sidelines during game day, right? This is how I impact um, our national will. This is how I impact soldiers. This is how I impact our cause, is by doing that. George, you did it through, and Matt, you guys did it through leadership and going on target. My contribution was different, but that's what kept me in the Army. Was there was never any thought about getting out. There was not even an opportunity. Was the war's here? I'm staying until it's over, and I did. I left the Army after we sort of slowed things down.
Yeah, that's we're gonna go. I'm gonna go to George here in a second, but B game. Think about like when George is done. When you said it was game day and winners want the ball, and there's a couple stories that like resonate with my heart for forever. That I'd love for you to kind of get into, that probably were right in those years where you decided, I'm going to stick with this. It's game day. I have a skill that can help the team. One of those first few was, Tucker Gar and the Rangers and all those people that you got to know in that situation. They wrote books about people like you. I would love for you to share like some of the things that you saw while you were out there for that experience and how that kind of shaped your life. But George, over to you. What brought George Sterling to the Army? I know you started, I'm going to give it away. I know where you started in the Marine Corps, but like, what was it that kind of brought you? You could just say the service, George, because I'd love to hear why the Marine Corps too, right? Like, why'd you start in the Marine Corps? Why'd you move over to the Army? And then what kind of made you stay?
Yeah, first big props to Brian's soliloquy there, because it was very professionally done. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be as professional probably, but I guess the listener will make that decision. But I'm going to delve in, and Brian's got a little more color to that story that he's told us over the years. And matter of fact, maybe there's time that Brian can get into some of the times he was young, infantry, private, PFC, whatever it was, specialist. I don't know I think you could stay till specialist, Brian, if I remember correctly. But there was some good stories about young trooper Brian Burlingame, man. Brian was on it, man. He was on it from the beginning. He reminds me, and I'm sure you were probably the same way, Matt, when you were a young Ranger. But he reminds me of and both you and him remind me of my very good friend Bill Oslin, right? And how he was as a young private. But anyway, with me, I'm going to talk a little bit about the childhood and my favorite word, and you're going to have to look it up, my peripatetic life, right? And my family, my parents were, and I'm not trying to get tears here, but my parents were a little jacked up alcoholics. Pops was did some jail time, things like that. There wasn't a lot of structure, and I'm making excuses, and I wasn't a good human, and I don't think I was a terrible person, but just not I was very selfish, very and it's revisionist now. I look back, but I didn't have, the what we learned as we got into the military of selfless service, right? I didn't have that, so I was getting in trouble. And back in the day, 1983, I got a few jams, got jammed up a little bit, and essentially then the judge couldn't say uh, go to the military or go to jail, but they could strongly recommend if you showed them MEPS paperwork that they would reconsider what they were going to do as far as your prosecution, right? So essentially, I had that option. So I had a buddy who's in a similar type of jam, and he, we go to the recruiters up in the Bronx. We go to Third Avenue up there, and I said, I didn't know shit about the service. And even though it was post Vietnam, didn't really understand any of that other than, you back in the day, you'd hear about the crazy vet, right? So I didn't know much about it. My pops didn't, I think he did some National Guard time during the Korean War where everybody at the time had to do something, right? And, but again, he was, he told stories about how he got busted, 4 or 5 times or whatever, for doing something, driving a Jeep when he was drunk or whatever it was. But anyway, I had zero understanding of the military. But ironically, when I was a kid, I did play with the plastic army men. And even back then, when I would set up I would deploy my troops. I was a tactical genius, man. It's just so you guys know, man. So that tactical genius, of course, proliferated in the rest of my time in the military. But the so I got in some trouble, and I go to the map station, and I go to the Army recruiter, and I said, hey, the only thing I knew was a little bit about Green Beret, right? And I said, I want to be a Green Beret. And at least this time in 1983, with this particular recruiter, he didn't lie to me. He said, listen, you can't just join the Green Berets, right? So I said, fuck that, man. I ain't joining the Army or whatever. My buddy comes up to me and he goes, hey, Stir, I'll join the Marine Corps. Let's do it. And that was it. 2 weeks later, Paris Island, yellow footprints, man. 2 weeks later. So, I get in the Marine Corps and I get down to Paris Island, and I'm gonna tell you, you talk about a culture shock. That was a culture shock. I didn't know what the hell was going on. It's not like we had the internet where I could have done some research. I didn't have a clue. Nevertheless, I will admit to this greater audience that I wasn't a stellar Marine. I was okay. I was adequate. I did go to the recon indoctrination program, so I became a recon Marine. Didn't get the 0321 designation because it's not how it worked back then, at least when I was over in 9th Marines and then 3rd Recon Battalion. And so, while I was in there, and then I stayed long. I extended over there, and then I went back to 29 Palms. And similar to Brian, just by, I don't know, and I wish, this is one of these very big regrets in my life that I didn't remember and continue to stay in touch with somebody. But anyway, again, the education officer at the Ed Center happened to be looking through ASVAB scores. I did decent on my ASVAB. And he called me in and mentioned, why don't you apply for the Marine Corps Early Commissioning Program? Why don't you think about Navy ROTC Marine Corps option? Why don't you think about the Army ROTC West Point Naval Academy? And I was like, this fucking guy is out of his mind. No one I knew went to college, so I was like, I don't know. And again, happenstance, luck, like you said, Brian. I happen to have a squad leader, Sergeant Goodrich. I remember his name, Staff Sergeant Goodrich. And he said, he's from Brooklyn, and he said, hey, listen, I'm taking these classes at this community college. I think it was called Joshua Tree Community College. And he goes, why don't you come take some classes? Because at 29 Palms, you went out in the field and you dug defensive positions, and there was a combined arms deal, and then you would move, you dig in again, and then when you were back in the rear, you had a little bit of time. So I started taking these classes, and I think I took macroeconomics, and I still have my transcript, macroeconomics, astronomy, and astronomy lab. Why I picked those three, I don't know. But I got two A's and a B. B in macroeconomics, and A in astronomy, and A in astronomy lab. And I was like, shit, I could do this, man. I could do it. So anyway, the education officer continued to stay on me to the point where he said, hey, I want you to come in and do these ACT and SAT reviews, right? Because I want you to take these tests. And I was like, yeah, sure. And I didn't. And so for whatever reason, this guy calls to my unit, and the SAT and ACT were coming up in like 4 days. And he said, he got my unit to release me to go to the education center and sit in there for 4 days. And I sat in there for 4 days, and he drilled me on the ACT and SAT. And needless to say, I applied to Navy ROTC Marine Corps option, Army ROTC, Naval Academy West Point, because he worked me through all of this, right? And so when it came back, the scholarships went winner, first alternate, second alternate. So Navy ROTC Marine Corps option made me a first alternate. Army ROTC, because I'm sort of giving it away. The Navy and the Naval Academy and West Point said prep school, and Army ROTC made me a winner. So I just took the short thing, and really I didn't have love for the Army or love for the Marine Corps, to be brutally honest. I was like, this is an opportunity where and this is my motivation, and I'll be honest, and this could seem very shallow. But my motivation was I just wanted to be in charge. I just felt when I saw my platoon commanders that I could do it better. And don't know why, and maybe again could be revisionist, but I just thought I could do it better. And my biggest motivation, and I've told you two this, was I wanted to tell sergeants what to do. That's what I wanted to do. And not gunnies, not E7s, but E6s and E5s, right? That's what I wanted to do. And I was like, yeah, I want because they always gave me a hard time, right? Probably deservedly so, but they gave me a hard time. So I was like, yeah, that's what I want to do. And I took the Army ROTC scholarship. A very quick thing. I leave the Marine Corps in August of 1985, and I drive across country to Tampa, Florida, because I got accepted into Tampa, and University of Tampa. And when I show up, the administrative folks there at the ROTC our department said, hey, you're not even eligible for a 4-year scholarship because the Army didn't give active duty Army people or Army members 4-year scholarships. But they were like, it's all right. You're good. so I ended up, I obviously got the scholarship, and so that's how, and then of course got commissioned as a second lieutenant in the infantry in 1990. When I get into the Army, and I don't know if this is part of it, man, maybe I'm already going too far, but I get into the Army with that motivation, right? And Desert Shield, Desert Storm occurs. And so I go over there for Desert Shield, and I don't know how many months, 7 months, 8 months, something like that. I had this unique opportunity where there was no training distractions like you would get back in garrison. It was just me, my platoon, fellow platoons, and of course the company, and to some degree the battalion, but I was really focused on that. And I was able to learn about training, and I was able to learn about, how to lead. And back to my guy, Bill Oslin, he was my mentor then, my professional mentor, right? Not my battalion commander, not my company commander, but a fellow second lieutenant. And then, at the conclusion of Desert Storm, I realized, I'm good at this. This is my niche. And of course, looking back, it was a lot that I didn't know, obviously, as the second lieutenant. But it really coalesced or solidified the fact that I dug this type of vocation, right? I liked what I was doing. And I was still very in my nascent stages of learning how to be a true selfless leader, right? But and again, that's Matt, as a soon to be '06 commander. I mean, it's always a continual learning thing, right? I just happened to, that everything, like Brian said, fell into place for me. And not because I had this grand plan, it just fell into place, And we talked about getting out, and Brian was mentioning it, and I'm sure he'll probably go back to it. So after that, I was all in, and then I went to SFAS selection, and then I went to Special Forces, right? And I really, really enjoyed it. And my second mentor there, professional mentor, happened to be my detachment operations sergeant, my team sergeant, and his name is Matt Rad, and so Matt Rad, at this point, I still, even though Bill attempted, and it was a work in progress, I wasn't a good officer. I think I was a good leader, but I wasn't a good officer. I don't know. People probably will disagree that you can't have those two separate, but I think I did. And then when I became a detachment commander under Matt Rad as my team sergeant, he started explaining to me, what NCOs look for in officer leadership, right? Being an officer, an officership, so because I was like, you ain't gonna tell me how to be a leader, sucker, but I might listen to what you're going to say about being an officer, right? And so, and we're, obviously, even to this day, it's still that he still calls me sir, which is ridiculous, but it's, he continues to mentor me even in my civilian life, right? And about different things with respect to, how you approach what you're doing, right? So again, very, very key person. And so I was going to get out. I was thinking about it, like Brian was talking about it, that mid-career thing. And I was like, I did some very interesting things during the non-war years when I was in 7th Special Forces Group, and some very interesting things. And I was looking for more, right? I just wanted to do something else, and I did some detail work where I got a taste of that other organization. And I was like, yeah, these guys maybe have the opportunity to do more than I could do at the in DOD. So I thought about getting out, but then I said, let me give this CAG selection a shot, right? So unfortunately, I got to right before the 40 miler and was removed. So I was really down. So I was really like, I'm gonna, I failed something, and it really bothered me. And I said, I'm going to get out. But I took this job as the XO to the G33 of the Army at the time, General Corelli. So as the XO, I'm in the Pentagon, and I'm learning things about the Army that in my previous levels I didn't really understand, or the military at large or writ large. And then it just so happened, like Brian said, I'm in the Pentagon when the plane hits, right? And so when that occurred, obviously, it was a game changer, as Brian alluded to. And of course, he doesn't have to allude to it; it's fact. And when that occurred, of course, then it was game's on. I got to do whatever I could do. And of course, we, and admit, and I think you both will admit to the fact that in the beginning of after September 11th, 2001, that we didn't think it would last, right? So it was like, we got to go and go hard. And then I went hard at least I tried the best I could to go hard and make a difference, be an effect, or create effects. And then the Army tells me that I have to go to CGSC, right? So they're telling me that to leave the combat zone to go to CGSC, so that sort of blew me away a little bit. I was like, what? And then of course, good officers, but they're telling me, this is what you have to do to be an officer. And it didn't make sense to me, right? This furthering or continuing education, right? And I went through that, and I was just like, and I'm just saying, at least with CGSC when I went, 2003, it was, I don't think I learned, or maybe I didn't give myself the opportunity to learn, maybe, because I just didn't understand how could this be more important than the war, right? from there, it became I have to get back into fight whatever way I can. And then things just by happenstance, by maybe some work on my part, I was able to continue to get back into the fight. And it ended up, of course, these wars lasted for a doggone while through the time when Brian and I retired, and we're still going on after Brian and I retired. But that's essentially my piece on how it all went down. And was there a grand plan like Brian said? For me, nah. It was just what happened to just present itself at the time, and I jumped on it.
Yep.
And it ended up working out. And but like I said, it wasn't because George Sterling had it all mapped out on I'm going to do this, and this, and then it'll make me that. I didn't think of it that way. So that ended up total years, 30 years, like you mentioned, Matt. But that was it, and like I tell everybody, with a snap of a finger, it went by like that, and all of a sudden, 30 years. I'm like, 30 years, really?
That's exactly what I was hoping to do, is kind of set the stage. How do you summarize 30 years of service and all the things that you and Brian have done? How do you summarize that into a 3 to 5 minute kind of thing? It's impossible, right? But what comes out as clear as day when you guys are talking is the same thing that these 20-year-olds and 22-year-olds are going through right now, which is, I'm not sure why. I just needed some discipline in my life. I wanted to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. I joined the Army. I started to like what I'm doing. I kind of like it. I like the people I'm doing it with. And a very common thing in life is things that you're good at, you usually enjoy doing. And things that you enjoy doing, you're usually pretty good at. And when you find those two things and they come together, for us, it was the Army. For other people, it's other things in life that they find that becomes their passion, right? And we say things like, I just fell into it. It's like somebody that says, I just got lucky. Well, luck is when you have preparation and opportunity come together, right? So in our cases, we say it just fell into place. Well, you didn't just fall into medical school. You got good grades when you were at West Point, right? B-game, And like George, you just didn't fall in and stumble and like trip over SFAS and all of a sudden you become a Green Beret and now you're in charge of the CRIF. Like you got picked. Like General Petraeus, Doc Petraeus, Lieutenant Colonel Petraeus saw something in you and he was like, that kid and Billy Oslin are going to do something special in our Army, right? And you got a lot of Steve Reese and a lot of other people that you served with as lieutenants, right? Those people started to build your life into who you are. And those people ended up having a really good, career outside the Army as well, when they served in, after that. The other common thing we hear is like that one moment. You said 9/11 B-game. George, you were in the Pentagon when it happened. When 9/11 happened, I was in college. I was walking down the hall, and I saw on the TV a plane crash into it. And I knew instantly that our lives had changed forever because I knew I was going back in the Army to be a second lieutenant. I knew I was about to leave, right? I was about 15 minutes away, maybe 10 minutes away from Hunter Army Airfield, where my friends in the Rangers, and I knew those guys are probably just got alerted and they're getting ready to go jump in somewhere. That's what they're going to go do. And I better be ready when I get out of this. I need to get out of this college. I need to get my degree and I need to get back out to the Army. So we all have that in common. But what I want to do now is I want to kind of go over to Brian, and then we'll go back over to you, George, and you talk a little bit about some of the experiences that you had while you were in the Army. Once that 9/11 kind of kicked off and you were like, I'm going to do this. This is my calling. Like, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my, we'll just say, we say the rest of our life. You guys have done a lot since the Army, but like, this is what I'm going to do as long as necessary. Right? And Brian, there was a lot of steps. There's a lot of things that go between West Point, going to med school, becoming a surgeon, and then being the surgeon for a special mission unit, right? There's a lot of steps that we're going to skip past a lot of that stuff and just get directly to some of them. And George, there's a lot of things that came between SFAS and going to AWG and doing all the things. Like, you don't just stumble upon like becoming the deputy commander of 3rd Group, right? And being a mentor to hundreds of other Green Berets. I'll hand it over to you, B, but like, one of the things I'm starting to live my life by, like a little bit of a mantra, if you will, is I'm not sure where I'm going in life, but I know exactly how I'm going to get there. I know what I'm going to do on a daily basis. I know the habits at which I have. I know the values that I have. I know how I'm going to, I don't know where I'll end up, but I know how I'm going to get there. We can go to B Game or we can go to George to talk about like some of those experiences that you had, after 9/11 and as we kind of went in,
Yeah, Matt, I'll take that. And I know you said you wanted to kind of skip some of those steps, and I think I don't need to do the play by play, but I do want to hit some things that sort of postured me to be able to do the things and have the opportunity to make choices, or at least be of value to the Army prior to that day. And so and it goes to leadership, and so one of the themes you asked about, what are some of the things that your leaders did that made you stay in, or what were some of your experiences that kind of colored you? For me, my residency, I had a guy that named Steve Hatz, who was a general surgeon. He had jumped into Panama, and he walked around with the Ranger Scroll, the combat Ranger Scroll as a doc, and that was pretty impressive. He's a West Point guy, very domineering, kind of alpha surgeon, and he was assigned to a special mission unit. And a couple other guys in my residency that were staff also were in this unit. So for 5 years, I get to see these guys come and go and do things when there were national crises, if you will. Now, you didn't get to know what they were, but you had a sense of what it was. And these guys taught me how to be a combat surgeon. My residency was really geared towards that. And one of the things I'm doing now as a core faculty at General Surgery Residency at Fort Liberty is providing those young men and women kind of the pieces that they need to have to be not just a surgeon, but a combat surgeon, right? And they're not really the same thing, to be honest. So when I left my residency, I came to Fort Liberty and went into that special mission unit. Was in that unit for a couple of years. One of the FST's forward surgical teams, their commander needed to leave. He'd been in the job for a while, and they looked around to see who could do it. I really didn't want to leave my special mission unit, not one bit, and was a little bit bitter about it. But I took over that unit, the 274th Forward Surgical Team, and that postured me again. You kind of, I don't want to say fall into things, but whether it's serendipity or you make choices based on principles and ethical principles, and usually good things happen, right? Usually puts you in a position to influence things if the choices you make are based on your principles and are ethical. And so I took this command, and then 9/11 happens a month later. And we're the FST that gets picked to go to Afghanistan. So the first FST in, the first forward surgical team in to support our troops. And at the time, it was the 10th Mountain. It was 5th Special Forces Group, and it was the guys that we know and we've deployed with a bunch of times.
B Game, let me jump in there for a second.
Yeah.
Pause,
Yep.
because what you just said right there is critical for a lot of our people that are growing up right now. Is that a lot of people are like, if I'm not deploying, it's not value added. If I'm not in that special mission unit, it's not the cream of the crop. If I have to leave, the Ranger Regiment to then go out Abrams Charter and serve outside in a conventional unit, that I'm not going to be able to make the same impact. What you just said, though, you kind of went over really quickly, was you had been in a special mission unit. Now you're with that forward surgical team. And who gets picked on game day? Your unit, right? Because the people go, and it might be happenstance, but a lot of times it's not. It's like, hey, I know the dude who's in charge of that. I know Brian Burlingame. I trust him. I know that his unit would be ready. Go get them and then bring them with us. They're going to be the guys that come with us. And that's the way it works, right? We did the same thing in Afghanistan. We're like, I know those pilots. That's Jeff Roberts. I know the 3rd Infantry Division Black Hawk pilots. That's Jeff Roberts. Go get Roberts and his crew, and we will use them in Afghanistan to execute this operation. Jeff, can you get a Chinook while you're at it? He's like, too easy. I trust Jeff. Next thing you know, his guys are flying for us, right? And that's the way that it works. Because even though you go out to these other units and you're like, oh, it's just a conventional unit. No, it ain't just a conventional unit. all soldiers are entitled to outstanding leadership. And when we go out there, all of a sudden, a regular unit turns into something special. And next thing you know, they're supporting special operations. They're the first ones into Afghanistan, working with the 10th Mountain, Operation Anaconda, getting led by a special forces officer, right? And he's trusting you guys in your organization. So I had to jump on that real quickly when you said that, B-Game.
Yeah, so basically, I'll tell the story that essentially your points just reinforce. 9/11 happens. I'm in the break room, and to George's point, you know that life is changing. Whether you think it's going to be short, long, don't know, but you know that it's not going to be the same. So we get picked. We go into. I have a little bit of a time and a train up, and I was able to outfit my unit with some people. I brought a couple of folks over that had left the special mission unit that I was in, in the last year or so, because I know they understood what they were doing. And to really prove your point, Matt, I'm going to talk about, before I get to Anaconda, a mission on 5 December 2001. It was it was our first mass casualty of the war. Certainly, we had taken casualties, and we had taken some guys, one or twosies. But this was the first one that was a big deal, and that was when we had the J Dam drop in Kandahar on December 5th. We had a couple guys unfortunately die, but we had over 17 casualties, a bunch of Afghani casualties, to include at the time Hamid Karzai. Well, he still Hamid Karzai, but he wasn't the president yet. And so again, so we now get pushed. I have this team that I went with. And we're going to go into Bagram. We're scheduled to go in on, I want to say, 6 or 7 December. And I'm out on a run, and I get called to the jock and say, "Hey, you guys need to get an aircraft. You're going." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" "Yeah, we're leaving tomorrow." No, something bad just happened. And so we had to get together, and we could only put so many people forward. And because of my time in that special mission unit, because of my understanding of certain key concepts on putting surgical elements forward, that I learned, both to some degree in my residency by these guys, but also at my time at this special mission unit, I was able to call together a 5-man surgical team, put them on an aircraft, and we landed along with the Fifth Group Reaction Force in Kandahar. And lo and behold, what comes right behind us? The guys that I just left, the JSOC guys, they came in a half an hour behind us. And this is all about relationships and how you solve problems, and it's leadership. Rather than run around like a clusterfuck, we knew immediately what we were going to do. And so we combined the two elements on one aircraft because we all knew each other. And then we set up a second aircraft for sort of the walk and wounded. We knew we could not stay where we were at because the conditions were not favorable. We also understood the concepts of when you have guys that are really badly injured and you're in a bad place, staying static to operate is a bad idea. You want to start moving them towards a better place. And if you have to intervene, you better have the skill to do that en route. And that's what we did. And so we took the two teams, put them on one put them on one C-130, and the other walk and wounded casualties on the other. And we performed the first, at the time, was the first daylight flight in Afghanistan. And to my knowledge, it's the first legit in-air combat surgery done in the back of an aircraft. And that was done not because the dudes that day kind of threw it together. It's because of the multiple other times we had practiced and rehearsed it for other units, other things, right? So again, it was opportunity that had met with prior preparation and practice. That's what allowed it to happen. I used to tell folks that was all the stars aligning in that day. The right guy calling and saying we're going to do the mission. My FST being there, and the unit guys that I knew, one of which was my office mate at Fort Liberty, just kind of being the guys that were in theater at the time, getting together and just having a familiarity to make things work. And so guys survived that otherwise wouldn't have survived because of that relationship building and that teamwork. So that was the 5th of December. And the one I think that you were talking about, it was Anaconda. And so that was one where we had set up the FST along with the JSOC guys and along with the Brits that were down the road, a Brit FST. And again, it's our relationship building. We set up, what at the time we thought was a pretty good system. to take care of soldiers. And the Rangers were an integral part of that because they were they were the ones getting hurt, but the guys that were in the back were the ones that were doing the litter bearing. They were the ones that were driving the vehicles. They were the ones getting the casualties from the airfield to the building. And it was, again, all of this work because we rehearsed, we practiced, and we knew each other from previously. Greenway, Sergeant Greenway, Ranger. Greenway.
Sergeant
Yeah,
Greenway.
he was.
Doug Greenway.
Yep. And so, he was the kind of the POC, and we worked with him, and it was, again, there was Rangers that really want to be out on target with, doing what they're trained to do. But they also knew for today, their job, the way they were going to impact the mission was going to take their injured colleagues and get them to us. They were going to, hey, I'm the medic, but I'm not going to be on target. I'm going to be in the FST, and I'm going to be assisting that team, right? Everyone understood their role. It may not be what they wanted, but it was what the team needed that day. And so that's kind of the story about that. So then it kind of comes down. Obviously, it's not just one day, but Roberts Ridge is the big one, right? So that's where you have a Chinook go down, then you have another Chinook go down. People in the jock making the decisions. A lot of them were former Moog guys, so some of that experience colored their decision making. And we had guys on a ridge that stayed there all day long, taking casualties because they knew that if they brought in another ship, other Americans were going to die, right? So, that clarity of purpose, that clarity of mission for people that are getting shot at to say, yeah, don't come and get me. We'll hunker down and come and get me when it's nighttime. And of course, everyone back in the ridge doing everything they can to get these guys off the ridge or to support them, to keep them alive while they're going. And there were some decisions that were made prior that I won't go into that I think enhanced the survivability of guys, things that we had done in terms of pushing blood forward and with time was not incredibly popular. Getting these guys trained up on certain, this is prior to the advent and the mass production of TCCC, which is kind of standard now.
Yeah.
Well, the guys that the John Holcomb is one of the three guys that really were instrumental in developing TCCC, and he was my staff, and I learned those concepts from him, from his experience in Mogadishu, which really was the backbone TCCC teachings.
And let me just add to that,
Yeah.
B. And not only, I'm sure the audience here will realize that Brian's a famous guy, man. Not only the military changed, obviously, but and how we did trauma medicine, but first responders changed. I mean, that had legacy impact across anybody in here, at least in the United States, and I'm sure it's in the rest of the West and maybe in other places. But it's how everybody now does it based on what you pioneered, man. So there should be a VIG for you. B. Somebody should be putting you on a speaking circuit or something, man. But that is I brag about that and brag about you routinely. Believe me, and especially when we did doing exercises here in Google about how to do stop the bleed, and you've had an impact whether you want to accept that or believe that you have, man. And I know a lot of other people contributed. I know that.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, you're a famous guy, so I can tell you that.
Well, that's incredibly generous of you, George. Like I think all of us were just kind of doing our job. But what you're talking about, I'll get into maybe later. I think when it comes to reasons I stayed, and I'll save that for later. But it speaks to some of the things you're talking about right now, at least at the end state.
I love the direction, B, that you are going is what you're keeping it somewhat generic. You're keeping it general, but you're like, how can people apply this to everything else that they do in life? And the thing I want to add there to what you just said is that you take these things and you learned all these lessons, right? You learned these lessons at the beginning of Afghanistan. You learned them in Iraq. You shared those with a lieutenant, me, on your back patio one night, and you talked me through, and it wasn't like a plan. You had you were just talking me through how to request the surgical rescue team. I can't remember. I had not gone back to the Rangers yet, or maybe I had. The times all blur together, right? This 20 years kind of blur all together. But you said this is how you need to request the surgical rescue team.
Yeah,
This
I
is
remember the story.
this is when you need to ask for it. Most people wait too long to ask for it. They decide, hey, I'm going to do a mission. It's going to go into this valley, and we're going to go after this guy. And I need to have a surgical rescue team within 15 to 30 minute flight of my Rangers that are going to be on the objective, because we can't fly them the hours it's going to take to get back to a surgeon. But usually by the time, it takes 2 to 3 days in order to pick that thing up, get the logistics to get it into the position where it needs to be, right? So you talked me through this, and you were like, this is how it needs to work. And I'll skip to the punchline, which is, we were out, I was at Shank, Logar, and Wardak. I was responsible for all of Logar and Wardak. And we had to go into a valley that was way out in the middle of nowhere. And it was going to take, we were going to have to land. It was going to be a long walk to get in there. And there's no way we were going to be able to get people back. We hadn't even met Trigger on this objective, and we weren't going to for several days. But at that point, I said, we're going to do this mission in about 3 or 4 days, and we're going to need the surgical rescue team, and I'm going to request it. And I requested it. And I think Josh Perry was the NCOIC at the time. And the first question he asked me when we were put in the request, we did all the things that we needed to do in order to get it. And he said, how did you know to ask for that this far in advance? And I said, Brian Burlingame taught me this on his back porch. He said, if 4 days from now, if you think that we're going to need to go after these guys, you need to make the request now, because it's going to take time to set the conditions. And sure enough, we set all the conditions. They flew those guys out to Logar. They got into position on time. I got off the helicopter with them. They set up the field surgical tent. They did all the things that they needed to do. Nobody got hurt. We got in there. We got who we were looking for. No contact. We packaged everything up, and he said, that's the way we want things to work, right? We like it when we don't have to do what we needed to be prepared to do for trauma. We shook hands, and they went home the next day. But that story, B-Game, of you teaching me something that, I don't know, 7 or 8 years later, I was putting into place, and when they said, how did you know to ask that question? And how did you know to request that asset that far in advance? I learned that from you.
I could repeat that story as well, because we've talked that a few times, man, and that once again, it shows this as we talk through things, and I guarantee you on that particular story, because I remember it, and I don't know if I was there on the time when you were talking to Brian, but we've talked this story many times after that. And even when we talk back and forth to Brian about forward surgical teams and forward trauma medicine and golden hour versus the golden 24 hours, and we talk all of that, and we go back and forth, we argue, we debate, and I guarantee you, Matt, even us, you and me, being non-surgical guys, have probably helped B. And as he looks at the problem set, so it's that collective between us three. I know I've learned immeasurably from it. So I just wanted to just throw that out there too, man.
Yeah, that's without question, George. You just said is because again, we exist to support you, right? So the asset, the ability is there ultimately, for risk mitigation, and we can talk about that. I think that's beyond the scope of this podcast. It really, the surgical team is about risk mitigation, tactical, operational, strategic risk, depending upon where you are and who you're working for and what you're doing. And we want to save that young Ranger 100%. That's our focus. But ultimately, saving of that Ranger is it provides that commander some Lebensraum to do what they need to do, and that's why you do it. And so I get short-sighted sometimes, as some of my peers do, understanding that there's other sides to the coin, right? There's other obligations, there's other things that you as a leader have to plan for when you're planning a mission. And while a surgical element might be part of that plan, it may not be. And you've shared with me some of the reasons why it doesn't make sense, right? Or some of the things that, hey, in an ideal world, you're really nice to have, but here's the cost of having you, and here are the other considerations of having you, and how do we set the conditions that you're going to be successful. And so I think it's, again, it goes back to the thing. It's relationships. It's learning from each other. I think leaders need to have that natural curiosity, right? You want to learn not just about, the specific thing that you're doing, but the breadth of the enterprise. And I
Yeah.
think some of our mentors, or some of the key leaders that we've served under, they've really talked about that. And that in order to be a good leader, you have to have that natural curiosity.
Yeah, absolutely. So like with that, George, there's two areas I kind of want to jump to. First, I want to go to George, and I want you to talk about, like, it's very similar about what Brian and the teamwork that he had with his folks when he showed up in Afghanistan. You later on went to AWG, Asymmetric Warfare Group, and then you found your way back over there working with Billy Osland and his guys from the 173rd, right? Instantly, your relationships that you had built with him and the people, you had instant credibility with his team. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about that experience, some of the things that you had because of relationships and because of prior experiences and skills, then allowed you to help hundreds and hundreds of people in the Korengal Valley. Then I want to go over to B Game to talk a little bit about Africa and some of the things when it comes to that most people don't know anything about, in some of the things that he's learned about medical and new ways happening on the continent.
So with AWG, it was a unique opportunity. When I joined that organization 2006, there was a lot that we could do then. It was a different kind of organization than it would have ended up becoming. What the unique thing AWG did for me is, and even before AWG, I happened to be around a lot of historical things, starting with the Pentagon, and hell, even before then. But hell, I was in Iraq when Fourth ID under Odierno was going to continue to do a movement to contact against Saddam. They used to fight against the Battle Brigade in Iran. It was a Christian group. But anyway, I happened to be the one with the sat phone that was between the SOTF commander, ended up becoming Lieutenant General Tovo. For God's sakes, man, yeah. The point I was going to make is that I happen to be at some of these key moments, right? So Odierno and the Fourth ID were doing a movement to contact against this group that fought against the Sada Brigade, but Tovo had put them in a ceasefire, but National Security Council and whatever the policies were out there said no, they have to capitulate. And I remember on the phone, and there's the CENTCOM commander, Abizaid. And so I'm passing the phone around between Tovo, Abizaid, and Gary Harrell was a SOC commander. So I happened to be the guy on the ground. So the point I'm making is, and that was a key historical a moment for how we prosecuted that war, right? And ironically, and it's, I don't know how much it's been written about, and admittedly, I'm ignorant and I haven't done my research. But really, when we capitulated that particular organization, who was the counterbalance to the Shias and the Sada brigades in Iran, that ended up resulting in the proliferation of Shia militants back into Iraq, which ultimately resulted in what Iraq turned into in the late first decade of 2000 there, around 2006, 7, and 8, into, of course, how it continued to be, and then eventually was counterbalanced by the awakening, and then, of course, right back again into the ISIS thing. So what AWG provided me was the opportunity to be, again, a fly on the wall, a Forrest Gump kind of person, where I wasn't a battle space owner, right? So I didn't have the emotional investment within that particular battle space. Yes, I had an emotional investment in the young, magnificent Americans who were fighting there, but I wasn't clouded by some of the other politics that resulted in being a battle space owner, as Matt, you're aware of. And so with AWG, it gave me the opportunity to from my position as a senior major and then promoted to lieutenant colonel, and I was able to then look at the problem set from things that impacted squads, platoons, and so forth. So as a battalion commander, Matt, your opportunity to do that is limited because you have a battalion you have to fight, right? So AWG gave me that unique perspective that very helpful in saving lives, right? And also not just saving lives, but accomplishing the tactical missions and tasks and having operational effects. I'm not going to sit here and say strategic effects, but having operational effects and definitely tactical effects for what the missions were. Now, we can argue about what was our strategy, in Iraq and in Afghanistan. But I know this for a fact. I know that battalions, companies, platoons, squads, fire teams were doing their jobs. I can tell you that, and they didn't question the strategy. They tried to stay agnostic to the strategy, and because we didn't even know the strategy. At least, there's many books written. When it came to how we applied our combat power and how we, accomplished particular missions, I think that I believe, and I believe for a fact that we were very, very successful at more efficient use of the enablers, i.e., the ISR and of course our close air support. Notwithstanding the surge in Iraq, and then of course the surge in Iraq resulted in assets being siphoned off of Afghanistan, and then you had to do this fight in Afghanistan with less resources, and then the resources that were in Iraq, were they being efficiently used? And was it how was all of that working? And I think AWG gave me that unique perspective to look at that. Not that George Sterling has it all figured out. He was a genius, and if they'd put him in charge, I would have won the war. I'm hopefully not implying that. Yeah. But that's what AWG did for me. And then back to the Bill Oslin thing is that was arguably the toughest fight in the war on terror. For a battalion. And yes, Bill, we lost great young Americans there. And I think if you look at how a battalion, prosecuted what its battle space responsibilities are, I just believe that I'm not saying they were perfect by any stretch, but and who is, but, I think I helped with that. And I learned a lot about where, a battalion commander doesn't necessarily have the ability to truly understand the fight at that squad level, at that platoon level, and some of the things that they were dealing with, and I was able to give that perspective back to those battalion commanders that I assisted, and I think most of them, took it and did different things with it. But Bill Oslin definitely took it and did very concrete and empirical things with it, right? So, and that again, back to the relationships, because we already had a previous relationship, right? So, and then when we get into the thing in Africa, as we, when Brian starts talking about that, a lot of those things that I learned, both within AWG, within SF, and then when I was the SOC 4 Northwest Africa commander, all of that helped me make decisions, right? Obviously, and we know that the military is pretty damn good at putting people in positions with a lot of both institutional and practical knowledge, for the most part. I'm not saying they're perfect. It's a complex organization, but they're pretty good at it. But I would say for the most part, the Army gets it right with their leaders. I think for the most part, not always, but for the most part. And even the ones that maybe aren't, as we look in retrospect, didn't do the way we would do it. Nevertheless, they were successful, and so the Army's pretty decent at it, and the leaders And again, giving you probably props that are going to embarrass you, Matt, but how you look at how you build your institutional knowledge, and you take these life's experiences and you put them to practical application in your leadership, whether it's combat or whether it's dealing with your family or your friends, all of these things matter, right? And so when you have that awesome responsibility of leading men and women, it all of that matters, and not just the fact that Matt's a tactical genius and he knows doctrine, and that's great. Yeah, I'm glad you know all of that. But how you take all of that other extraneous things and you funnel it in, and it's part of your decision making, rubric, that's what matters, man. And I think the most successful leaders are the ones who do that.
B game. I want to turn over to you here in a second to talk a little bit about some of the similarities, the experiences that you learned in those conflicts and on those continents, and then how you brought that into Africa, and if that starts to segue into your post-Army experiences and some of the things that you've been doing since the Army and you've seen over in Africa, we can kind of go off into that area as well. And then just to put a bug in your ear for both of you guys, George and Brian, is after we talk Africa, after we talk about like you're starting to get that transition from Army to post-Army life, I also want you to start thinking about where you incorporate family and how having a family started to affect your decisions to get out of the Army, and then decisions after the Army things. So again, that's three things. Finish up a little bit about Africa. How did family start to affect you as you became older in the military? And then segueing into all these experiences, these relationships, the knowledge that you've gained after 30 years of being in the military, and how that applied to what you're doing at Google, and Brian, what you're doing with some of these other organizations outside of the Army. Be game.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So I want to tie together two things that you brought up earlier and what George just spoke about. And what I'm going to say is not remotely revelatory or innovative. It's something that's pretty well known, and I just want to acknowledge it. But I want to acknowledge it in a way that George was talking about. We're as leaders, as soldiers, as people, we're the sum of our experiences, right? That's nothing new. But, George mentioned the Army gets it right most of the time on putting people in the right place and the right job. The other thing I was going to add is, it goes back to what your point was, I think the Army does a pretty good job of developing experiences that otherwise we wouldn't. And I think some of the organizations we've worked for specifically do a really good job of that and getting us opportunities to learn things. And so we have a diversity of thought, right? I think, the Army being diverse in thought and in experiences is part of what makes our problem solving pretty powerful. And so, and why is it important? You remember, hey, I just want to be on target. I just want to be in the OR. I just want to be on staff if you're one of those guys, right? Well, the Army doesn't let you do that, right? They make you do these jobs that maybe are outside of your wheelhouse, maybe make you a little bit uncomfortable, but later on pays dividends. So I think the Army in general does a pretty good job about putting us in positions that we can help out the team later on. And I think that dovetails into what George was saying earlier. And so the highlight of that for me is in 2005. I was in the unit, and I had done back-to-back deployments, and my at home it was fine because like you mentioned family. One of the things that my wife has never really done is sweat my deployments, right, or sweat my commitment or my requirements really to the job, right? She understands the job of being a physician. She understands the job of being in the military, and while she may like it to be different, she doesn't sweat me on it. And I've been very fortunate for that during my career. And so I needed a bit of a break, and I was asked to go down to SOC Cent. At the time, George just mentioned him, General Gary Harrell was the SOC Cent commander. And at the time, SOC Cent owned Africa. And so one of the things I had to do when I was down there is develop a plan for the Cree in Africa in case there were some things. And it was my first cut at the apple because in Afghanistan and Iraq, right, they're pretty big places, but they're not really geographically that big. And solving problems of logistics, solving problems of time distance, they're really not that complex. I mean, they can be, but compared to now, Indo-PACOM, Southcom, Africa, right? Huge periods of log, evac, really hard problems. So my first time in 2004 or 5, understanding what those distances were, is like, oh yeah, Africa's big. It isn't until you get there that you realize, holy shit, this is really big, right? And the analogy that I like to use is to give someone some perspective in the United States that, they know Africa is big, but they don't necessarily understand how big is. You're going to get shot in Cleveland. Your ambulance is coming from Caracas, Venezuela, and they're bringing you to the emergency room, which is in Seattle, right? That's the distances we're dealing with in Africa. And frankly, even bigger in Indo-PACOM. And that's what you're dealing with now, Matt. And so how do we solve these problems? And so it goes back to, again, why did I stay in the Army and why did I seek opportunities where I did? Because I found guys that solve problems in a unique way that I thought that's how problems should be solved. And we've had this conversation before, and within the Joint Special Operations community, I think there's a very certain way we look at problems. And so my time in SOC Cent informed me of the tyranny of distance that's in Africa. And then I go back to the unit as the unit commander, and we have some things in Africa we've got to put guys in, and you sort of get rehabilitated, introduced to those problem sets. And so why is this important? It isn't the Africa problem that's the important thing. It's understanding that you have a unique problem. How are you going to approach it? Then how do you bring in all of these prior and other people maybe that have experience in the area, and how do you solve that problem? Applying the same principle as you will in Afghanistan, where you have 88 rotary aircraft, multiple FSTs that are split in order to meet Secretary Gates's dictum of, if you're shot, you're on a surgical table within an hour, right? That golden hour. And, we talked about it before, and George mentioned it, the golden hour. And it's actually the golden 24 minutes, George, not 24 hours. But that's fine.
We call it the golden 24 hours, B, because there wasn't a golden hour. And back to you again, the whole austere medical or trauma medical training was again resulted from you and people like you. Yeah. So because in Africa we didn't have the rotary wing asset for the medevac, right. So it was a ground medevac to a CASEVAC platform that could potentially be a day away, depending. Yeah.
And so that's where we're going to, we talk about, and I'm going to be very technical here, and Matt, I hope this doesn't kind of throw off the discussion, but we look at the data, and again, I'm using the medical field to sort of approach a problem. We look critically, and the Rangers were incredibly important, right? So the Rangers collected the data on their casualties. A lot of organizations weren't doing it, but the Rangers did. And that informed a lot of policy changes and a lot of way we're doing business. And a guy named Brian Eastridge looked at that data in 2012 and said, all right, where can we be better? And right in the hospital, we had really good survival rates if you made it to the cache or the FST or the launch stool. Did a pretty good job keeping you alive if you made it there. But we're having a lot of guys that were dying prior, even informed by resourced by Secretary Gates' dictum. And so we looked at, who was survivable. And they looked at all the Dover, Delaware data, and they said, these are the injuries that they may not have been survivable, but they were potentially survivable. And they looked at that. And most of them are pre-hospital. TCCC, and this is what George is kind of getting at, if you institute programs and you train your first responders, if you train not just your medics, but your shooters as well, and your support staff in TCCC, they can do things that get after saving lives. And at about 24% of preventable deaths can be addressed with TCCC. 67% need surgery. So that means 2/3 of the guys that might survive are going to die unless you get a surgical team there. And that's really where I've been spending my efforts, kind of post-military and even in the military, is talking to guys like you and George and other commanders to say, here's the data. If you want your young Ranger or your young MARSOC Marine or your young 82nd Trooper to survive a potentially lethal injury, you've got to get him to a surgeon. It isn't within an hour. It's actually much shorter than that, right? And every minute you spend, that guy's bleeding to death or something else is happening. And so the idea of getting your surgical teams forward as close to the proximity of injury as possible is what I've been trying to do. And again, it's solving a specific problem. And it's not new. It's certainly not. Basically, it's recreating what we had in the Civil War, what we had in World War II when you had surgical elements on the beach at Normandy, right? You're just going back to, there are no new ideas. It's just refreshing the old ones with new technology, right? And recognizing that. Yeah, but getting into, Africa. So I had the opportunity to support some other governmental agencies and support the DoD now in Africa. And it's my experience in SOCCENT. It's my experience in the special mission units, both as a doer and as a commander, that you have a difficult problem and how do you solve it? And this goes back to the other thing, and this is why, to me, it's a little bit important. I think it's important to George as well. And, post-career, I do this for a couple of reasons. One, guys that we spent our lives deploying with are back in harm's way, and they had no DoD support, or they had no support to do things. And I felt they were doing missions that were important to our country and our country's national security. And I wanted to provide my piece in giving them support. And the other part is, what are the things that you look at that give you purpose post-retirement other than a paycheck? This is more my opinion and some others' opinions, but everyone's opinion is that the best way to get after this problem is to, not move the casualty to the OR, but move the OR to the casualty, right? And the principles and how do you do that? And when can you and when can't you?
Mm-hmm.
And that goes back to talking to guys like you and George and understanding here's the capability, but you're the decision maker, right? We're just like ISR. You can put us somewhere you're not. We provide you the data. We provide you hey, you have a risk. Here's how we mitigate it. But the decision makers are commanders, and then kind of living with that. And if you're informed, you make that decision. But when you're ill-informed and we have the opportunity to give you better data to make those decisions, we need to do that. Mm-hmm. And I think, George, that's one of the things that you've talked about both in your lifetime as a when you were not in command, and whether it's AWG or the DCO, is providing that leader with the best advice so they can make decisions.
Yeah. And just to add to that, this is one of those things, goes back to your Ford surgical team vignette, Matt, with respect to the Logar Providence Award Act. And so as talking to Brian over those years and faced with how do you conduct operations and what is the most important thing? Is it actions on the objective? Of course that's important. But what really makes the operation successful? Where have you looked at your tactical risk? Where have you decided where you can assume some risk? And where is the red line where you're not going to assume risk, right? And talking to using back in your story, that always was in the back of my mind. And as when I was in Africa, it was more, actual objective was great. I want to see the CONOP. That's great, on actual objective. But I really want to see the logistics. I want to see where is the non-standard aviation going to be? And what is the distance and how is that route or the multiple routes, primary, alternate, tertiary, whatever, back to that? And then what is the ability to stabilize this type of casualty versus this versus the other, right? And all of that I would never have known without you talking about that particular thing. And then, of course, one Brian Burlingame, where we went back and forth on it. Not that I agreed with everything Brian said, but it was more of, this is how I look at it. Okay, so I juxtapose that with what the operations effects were, right? And then you look at that thing and you go, okay, logistically, is that worth it? Is it worth it? And that, and again, just to highlight the simple fact that I know we could talk for hours about this kind of thing, and we have, but it's that's again, you as a leader never think that you are the smartest guy in the room, even if you are, which most likely you're not. But even if for whatever reason you happen to be, nevertheless, there's a lot of smart people, and you got to listen. Ultimately, you make the decision, but you better listen to these smart people.
Mm-hmm.
That's a fact.
Yeah, Matt, if I could just, kind of double stamp what George is talking about, and this is not specific to what I just mentioned, but I think for all young leaders and even, senior guys, is that, you've got to know what you're doing, right? So obviously strategy and understanding what the national strategy is, or the campaign plan informs that. But when I talk to leaders, like, look, there's basically three levels of risk, right? You've got strategic, operational, and tactical risk. And how do you mitigate that risk at all those three levels? They may be the same, but they may not be, right? And I use this, and I'm a little hesitant to say this. You may have an operation or something, and you have to mitigate risk. Well, if you're in Fallujah in 2008, like you were, Matt, it is absolutely tragic if a young ranger gets injured and dies, right? For that ranger's family, the squad, but it doesn't move the needle one iota strategically, right? That same ranger platoon now is in Somalia in 2024, and that ranger gets ill and killed. It 100% is going to be a strategic problem. It's going to end up in the national news, and it has the potential to change national policy. So that young captain or major who's maybe the ground force commander, or that colonel who's back in the jock, for proving the con up or not, has to say, what mitigation risk strategy do I have to employ? What are the assets that I do? It isn't just, I'm going to go kill that bad guy, or I'm going to go rescue this person. It's, what is the thing that's going to change national policy, and how do I avoid that, right? Because that changes my ability to do my job the rest of the 363 days a year, because I can't do it anymore because it's changing what we're allowed to do, right? What gives me the freedom of movement so I can do my campaign plan? And so, that goes right to what George was talking about. Over.
Yeah, and I know in special operations, of course, what's the definition of a special operations? Obviously, a strategic impact or effect, right? And not that in the tactical piece is a tactical piece, but does it have a strategic implication, right? Just like Brian was saying. And regardless of whether you're flown in there with the 82nd or it's a defined theater of armed conflict, and some of those things are pushed down to the tactical level. Nevertheless, and as we look at what's occurring now, everything Brian said of the strategic impact or effect applies, man. And whether it's what you're doing in Indo-PACOM, Matt, and you think it's a very tactical thing, but somehow your unit pisses off, somebody, that's a strategic implication, man.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because of partnerships. So that's one of those kind of things that you always are going to have to somehow, articulate as you go forward in command, because everything in Indo-PACOM is strategic, at least in my humble opinion, as a old retired guy, but yeah. And that's why, and for the listeners, and hopefully you won't cut this out, Matt, for the listeners, believe it or not, these conversations are what we conversate about, man. That's what we talk about. Yeah, we bullshit a lot, but then we always invariably end up with some very deep stuff. Now, granted, I'm not saying we got it all figured out. We never have, but we damn sure attempt to figure it out. That's for that's for sure.
Amen.
And so hopefully your listeners will know that that's how things happen, man. When groups of like-minded people with a desire to create effects and impacts get together, they can actually come up with some shit. So keep that in mind when hopefully people listen to this thing. You what you have to say and do matters.
Yeah.
But you better go and test it. Like when Brian and I would have arguments about different things. You didn't argue as much, Matt. You were more of the nicer guy. But Brian and I would argue about things, and I may even get mad. But afterwards, I'd go, interesting. Yeah, and I would internalize it.
Yeah.
And then you invariably, Matt, would always come back because you're the nice guy. You would come back and you would always put it in like a I don't know, contextual thing, man. You say, well, this and that, you did this, you said this, George, and Brian said this, but have you thought this way? And maybe you need to go. You would always be that facilitator or interlocutor or whatever the hell that word is, right? So and that's why I cherish this stuff, man. I cherish talking to you guys, man. So
hey Matt,
go
just one quick thing, and I know that this podcast is about leadership, and and you've already had some others, but I would say this, and this is totally off topic, but I think it's important, and George has hit it. Young soldiers and young leaders, surround yourself with people that like talking about your craft and your job and are serious, right? Hey, it's great to talk about, your car or your sports team or your weapon or whatever, but associate with people that like talking about your job, right? Like, if you look at whether it's a baseball player or a football player, you want not just professional office talk, but like we would talk about just stuff in the military, right? We hung out, we liked each other. And when we talked about stuff, we talk about sports a little bit, but surround yourself with people and seek out people that love talking about the job. Does that make sense? Do you agree with that, guys?
Yeah, but I just I want to add to that though. But we also, us three, talk about our sports teams. We talk about cars or weapons. So it's not like we're always on that upper end, trying to always solve the problems and we never have fun. We sure enough have fun. Oh, yeah. So I want to make sure that's also there. But ironically, talking that higher level stuff is fun too. So
I think that's part of building relationships is like when, and Dave Pitt said this a couple episodes back where he said, you can build relationships in comfort or in crisis. And we built our relationships a lot of times in comfort so that when a crisis happened, we knew what each other were thinking. We knew we had talked through some of these decision-making cycles. Like we talked about some very challenging things. And Brian, I loved how you said, surround yourself with people. I always say, surround yourself with phenomenal people. The one word where you said around your job, I'd say about surround yourself with people that love conversating about your calling and what it is you were called to do. Now, that goes back towards younger soldiers, younger lieutenants, younger privates. Okay, maybe this isn't your calling yet. Maybe you're doing whatever it is you enjoy doing right now. You don't want to do this for the rest of your life, but surround yourself with people that love talking about and conversating about what's driving you right now. That drives these conversations, great conversations with people.
Yeah, Matt, that's well said. I couldn't find the right word, so job was it. But what you just said is exactly spot on.
Yeah. So what I want to do with both of you guys, though, is I want to start to move towards our families, because your family was a huge part of your development over the years and our families together. And I want you to talk about how, as you got older, how your kids and our wives, and they influenced our decisions and the way that we did. Because I loved your quote when you said, advice on making decisions. We're helping people understand risk in their life. We're helping people define what success is in their life, right? As you become a leader, you have a lot of people that come to you for advice, right? And so folks want to hear like from you, family, when did it start to become, and how did it start to influence your decisions? As we start to go from there, from family and influence decisions, I want to start to go into the area of after the Army, and how has all of your experiences that you've gotten going forward influenced like how you're, again, advising people, assessing risk, and helping the organizations that you're a part of now outside of the Army. George.
And Brian said, and unfortunately, this probably won't be groundbreaking. Oh, but before I even start, Matt, the organization, the counter, the batter core was the MEK. And I don't know, and I want to give a plug to Google Gemini, our AI platform, because that's where I found that shit. So just give it a plug, man.
It's
But
in there. It's in
MEK.
there.
All right. So I was talking to Lisa about this, and Brian said it, so it's I'm sure the listener, whomever it is going to say groupthink, but really, Lise, my wife, Lise, Annalisa, she there was there was this one time, only once in my military career where I didn't do what I wanted to do, and it was primarily because she got pregnant, and I decided that I wouldn't deploy while that baby was the baby obviously was in gestation, but and not that the military, obviously we know the Army would send me back for the birth of my child, but that was the only time because it was in a relationship. Relationships go through ups and downs, and I was probably at the time in a very selfish and narrowly focused path that I wanted to do at the expense of my family. And I was all in. I mean, the war was going to end. I had to be there and share the burden. I had to, always make sure I was, part of what was happening. And when I made that decision, that was the only time. And she didn't ask me to make that decision. She didn't give me an ultimatum. This was a decision I made, and it turned out to be a good decision. And obviously the wars continued, so it was irrelevant. But for the most part, across and maybe I'm getting a little esoteric here, but for the most part, my wife backed any decision I made, and she knew what I wanted. I mean, I was transparent. Now I'm like, hey, I'm a warrior. I'm doing warrior things. That's what I'm going to do, and I'm going to share the burden, and I'm not going to let somebody else deploy when I can deploy. I want to replace that person because maybe that person has other things going on. My wife, I'll give her a couple props here. She's this as your wives are, and so I'm sort of letting it out. But the thing is that they're resilient, man. They don't necessarily need us. They want us around. They don't necessarily need us. Yeah, we're helpful when we're around, but they sure enough can take care of business. Now, did I give her a choice? Nah, admittedly I didn't. Admittedly I didn't. I was just going to do what I was going to do. Again, you can call it selfish, but she understood, and we had that. She knew what I was trying to do. I want to be high speed. I want to try to do the hardest things. I want to do those things, right? And she supported it. Now she was a former military officer. Her father was a Navy chief. He was deployed during the Iran hostage crisis. She understood all of these things, from a young age. And then, of course, like I said, she was a military officer, so she understood the military life. And she knew that my fragile ego, or whatever it was, I had to continue to pursue everything I possibly could to be the best I could. Was I successful all the time? Of course not. I gave you the example earlier about failing that one selection. I would leave it at this, and maybe Brian will add on to this, or maybe he'll go a different way. But you better be fully transparent of who you are to your significant other, so that there's not any underlying, hidden, simmering, whatever the word is, agendas or feelings hurt or whatever the good word is, and I can't think of it. So if you want to do this job, which requires not probably, because I'm in corporate America now, definitely requires more of a commitment than corporate America. If you're going to do that, you got to be transparent about it. I don't know, but yeah, Brian, please.
Yeah. So, obviously I know Christy and I know Lise, and you guys know Allison. I think we all end up in the same place as supported, and the level of shared decision making is different for each one of us, and all of our wives have different strengths. But the bottom line is, I think what you have to do, and you just mentioned, is have those. You have to know what you're going to do, right? So I was fortunate in that, unlike Matt, you've had to make moves, and a lot of your moves that you've done have been, with shared decision making with Christy, and you've thought about the kids, where you're going to go. Even though you've had an access only a couple of different places, you've had to move. For me, I stayed at Fort Liberty, but I had to either take jobs or do jobs within this purview. I didn't have to physically move. And so where I'm going with this, I had an
West
06,
Point.
huh? Well,
West
the
Point.
last one,
Yeah.
the last one, and I made that decision based on family as well, in terms of maintaining my GI Bill. But where I'm going is I had this opportunity to talk to an 06 recently that's kind of at a crossroads in his life, and we went through things. And kind of what you're talking about, Matt, is when you make decisions for your family, you really just have to be honest with yourself. What is it that you want to do, and what are the priorities, right? And you can't have priority 1A and 1B. You're going to level it out, right? All right, my family, I'm gonna be a good officer. I'm gonna be a good soldier. I'm gonna do a job, but location is critical for me. Or I'm going to do a good, because we're all going to do a good job no matter where we go. We're going to plant, we're going to bloom where we're planted, right? I don't love that phrase, but that's what the Army asks of us. And so it's either about a location or it's about your family. And on occasion, like George just mentioned, the job was the priority. The quality of the job was the priority, and the family was going to move with. Now, the family came in second, but you knew when you made your decisions, what was the block that you needed to check, right? And so the kind of the advice that George keeps calling, I would give is just be honest about what's important to you and your family. And then when you make your decisions about your career, just go in that order, right? And that will help you make those decisions a lot easier. It was like, hey, I got to stay on the East Coast because mom is sick. All right, for X number of years, you're going to do that, right? Or, you know what, I've got to be an S3, I've got to be, a DCO, and I'm going to follow that job wherever it is. Okay, then the family's going to have to move. Or, the wife says, yes, I support you. That job is incredibly important. Go do that job. But so-and-so is in grade X and we're not going to leave. Or, I also have a job and it's important to me. So you go do that. I'll love you. I'll support you and I'll do everything you can. But me and the kids are staying here. And then it's not going to affect our marriage or our relationship. We're still going to do all those great things. But and again, you don't necessarily have to stay at home. A lot of folks are geo-bachelors. I've done it. George has done it. I don't know that you've had to do it, but we've come back to our families and our spouses. And while we're gone, we did things to maintain those relationships. So I think your family always impacts your decision, but how they impact your decision is based upon what your shared priorities are with your spouse and your kids.
Yeah.
Next two things are going to be what's been the biggest thing that's been different after the military, after 30 years of the Army and being outside of the Army for you guys. And then after that will be, so what? So all those things that we've learned about the Army and about the military will be, so what now? Like, what's driving you guys right now? What's got you fired up? What's got you getting up in the morning? So those kind of two things. So let's stick with B game. Go.
Yeah, I have an answer, and I bet you my answer is the same as George's. I think if you ask 1,000 guys that have got out of the military, 999 are going to say the same exact thing. I'd be shocked if this is not a true statement. And that is what's missing, what's the change? It's the collegiality, and it's the focus of the mission. That focus of purpose that you have in the military, especially in the war years, that isn't there. And whether it's corporate America or you own your own business or whatever it is, I think those are two things. Kind of you miss the camaraderie and you miss the mission or the focus of purpose.
I love how you leaned in. Leaned in. And that's why I love doing these with a little bit of FaceTime B game. And maybe someday I'll get to where these are getting videotaped or whatever. But you leaned in when you said that, what you just said right there.
Yeah. And you should, because, I don't know who the listeners are, Matt, but they're probably career guys. So maybe this won't have as much impact. But I mean, the bottom line is this: I've done my life's work. everything I do now is gravy, right? I've done what matters. And this is because I'm like the anti career guy, but I am the career guy. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? So it's like I did a career, in the military and everything. And I think, and you know me, obviously Brian knows me. I talk the tough guy stuff and the thuggery and all the different things I did, and I say that's who I am and blah blah. But no, who I am is the 30 years I did in the military, man. That's who I am, and it's and nothing else even remotely compares to it. And here's a guy, and for hopefully there's a listener out there that's maybe question this, and I'm not sitting here telling, and Brian won't either, and hell, Matt, many years you got it, and you can't either. It ain't perfect. There's a lot of jackassery. I got it, man. But ultimately, it's like Brian said, and I can't even repeat it eloquently, but it's purposeful. It matters, and even and hopefully for Matt, when you get into command, it's when you talk to young specialists, young PFC, it's like, hey, listen, what you're doing, my man, matters. And yeah, you got to dig this fighting position. You got to go out and do maintenance in the motor pool. I got all the stuff that sucks. You got to I assume they still clean the barracks. I don't know. Maybe they got contractors doing that now. But I mean, yeah, a lot of that sucks. But overall, you'll never find, as exampled here, you're never going to find better relationships, man, better people that you can always call, whether you talk to them 20 years before, you say, yo, I need you. That motherfucker, excuse my language, will show up. And if it's true. And that's up to you to cultivate that. I guarantee I call either one of you. You're going to come to that wall, And now, Matt, you have 4 kids. Brian's a fucking goddamn surgeon, for God's sakes. Yeah, there's going to be a decision making matrix or whatever it's called, that you're going to say, well, if I do this, then I lose my medical practice. If I do this, I'm going to get out of get kicked to the curb as a colonel, maybe potentially general, whatever it is. But I guarantee you, and whether your listeners believe this or not, I guarantee if it was really, really mattered, and it wasn't just some bullshit that Sterling, wants to go do something with, because somebody like pissed him off at the shopping mall or something. No, but if it was something that really mattered, and you would know what it is, you two would come. Whether it costs you your military career, Matt, or it costs you your doggone doctor's license, for God's sakes. And that's what matters.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what you develop in this military.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what we get here. And I got a good job. I mean, Google is very good to me. They pay me good money, and I think, and it's fun. Not even remotely compares.
Yeah.
Not even remotely. I don't care if Google hears that. I'll tell Google that. So it doesn't matter.
Big game.
Yeah, George, that's spot on, and I know you've referred to those guys as a 3 a.m. guy. And I think the military fosters those, I already said it once, those relationships, is that, if you talk to 50 military guys, 49 of them are going to have at least one, maybe 2 of those 3 a.m. phone call guys, right? If your corporate headquarters and me, if I'm at my private practice in Moore County, if I ask 50 of those guys, probably none of them have that 3 a.m. guy. Maybe 1 or 2, right? And that's probably the guy they had from high school or their college roommate they've known for 30 years, right? But that's it. When I left the Army in 2016, I had some opportunities within the Army that I think were pretty powerful. But I realized at that point that my base job at the end of the day was to be a surgeon. And I knew that if I continued going down that pathway, I was never going to be a surgeon again. And so I went into private practice. I did a lot of work. It was very, very busy. Like every other person that got out before me that was my friend told me, I was going to miss the job. I was going to miss the relationships and the camaraderie. And while the guys I work with were really good dudes, it wasn't the same. And so I came back to Fort Liberty and started working back at that institution. And then I started working for another company that provided support. And we've already talked about a little bit, to DOD or other OGA elements, because it provided that mission. And I stayed in my private practice so I can operate and do those things. And that's kind of what I wanted to kind of put out there is you have all of these itches you need to scratch when you get out. And when you're in the Army or the Marines, whatever, for the most part, that job scratches all of them. When you get out, you may have to find different ways to get all those itches scratched. For me, I had to find that in 3 different places. For George, I can't answer for him, and maybe you go without. That's a decision you have to make. And so that was kind of the point I wanted to share with you, Matt, and for the audience.
That was a perfect one. I was speaking to Edmund Carrazzo the other day on a long walk because he's getting ready to separate from the Army. He said the same thing that you just said, which is it's going to be hard for him to find one job after the Army that's going to scratch all the itches that he has in his life. So maybe he's got to go find 2 or 3 different things in order to scratch those different itches instead of just one job that's going to do them all like the Army has. B-Game, like when you said like the 3 a.m. phone call person, I got my phone call about you at about, I think it was 1100 hours. Yep. I was standing on the field getting ready to watch I had just finished actually the regimental change of command right there, the 75th Ranger Regiment's change of command. And somebody that knew you, that knew I knew you, came up to me and said, we need to go to the hospital in Columbus. And you rode the car with you and Pineapple. And I remember how my stomach felt the whole way I drove from that field to get to the hospital to be, I think I was the second person that was there with you. It was the regimental surgeon that was there. And it was just the 2 of us when we first got there.
Yeah, no, I remember that, for a good 36 hours, my survival was very much in doubt. And I'm very grateful for that breaking the way that it did. But I remember the very first words you said to me, we got him. And he told me about how the Patriots had just picked up 2 very good players. Juxtapose that with, he came in with and their first words for me was, did you get rid of the bottle? So, so, yeah, but no, it's, no, I know you and Christy really took care of Allison, during that very difficult time. You guys serve as my 3M guys. I probably got 1 more. And I know that, Matt, you've got a few, and George, you've got a few. But we're very fortunate. Again, there's a lot of guys that don't have any. And we've got a few. And I firmly believe, again, it's because of our jobs in the DOD. And you form relationships in comfort. But some of these guys are dudes that we form the relationship in crisis. So we know that when really, really, really bad shit happens, those guys are going to show up, and they're going to show up ready to roll up their sleeves and do the work. And while, you and I, or, I know you and George had some experiences. George, we've never had that in extremis, in combat moment together. But I know from others that have shared those times with you that if I need you, you're going to be there.
Hell yeah. Matter of fact, I'm obviously I know about the car accident, but I'm just jealous of the fact that I wasn't there, to help. I wasn't there to be the second dude, in the hospital. It's that kind of shit. And that's, I think, Matt, that goes to your, maybe some of the essence of the podcast is that matters to people like you and I, man. For Brian using that example, it's I want to be there for fucking Brian. I want to be there. But if I'm not there, I feel like I've somehow not performed, to what I should have done. You know what I'm saying? It's hard to say it, but yeah.
Yeah. I think we cover down for each other over all these years. Like with every Memorial Day weekend when our families come together, it's not every Memorial Day weekend where all three of us were there. There was a lot of times where it was just George. There was a lot of times where it was just me. There was one time where I think it was just Brian. Me and you were both gone. And so when we do bring everybody together and we do get the whole crew, we know now that it's special. What I want to do last is, so what? So we talked about all these things, right? And what we're trying to share with a lot of leaders is what is driving people to serve. Nowadays, you start to hear a lot of the common things between folks that have been doing it for a long time and the folks that are doing it right now, which is all the things that we've been talking about. It's the camaraderie, it's the relationships that you build, it's the experiences that you build, it's the experience that you have while you're in the military. And what I believe is that when people have a good experience in the Army, good relationships in the Army, they're either going to stay with the Army and stay with the military for a longer period of time, if this is what they enjoy doing and this is what they're good at, or they're going to say, I have other things in my life that I want to do. I want to go do other things, but now I'm going to be the world's best advocate for you and all the people that are in the Army and as I leave the Army. Right. Do you have any thoughts on what leaders that are in the Army right now, what can us as leaders be doing to help people have those kind of experiences as we go forward?
And hopefully I didn't interrupt a very profound thought from you, Brian. But, I talked to my very good friend, Bill Oslin, right? So he talks, and the things we talk about are what you're focusing on in these podcasts, right? Why does Ryan want to go to a service academy? Why did Trey want to go to a service academy and serve? Why? I mean, so Trey's in, Ryan wants to go to a service academy and serve, right? Why did Brady want to serve? So we got to look at it, and we already talked about my story. My story is different in the sense that I fell into it because I got in trouble. Okay. I mean, shit like that happens. I got it. I would submit probably people that came into the military like me, probably for the most part didn't stay 30 years. I mean, they were probably, they never quite clicked. They didn't understand what they were doing. I happened to things fell into place, for whatever reason, thus 30 years later. So the point, I think ultimately the point I'm trying to make is what's going to make young men and women want to serve is not the benefits, although they're good, not the pay, which ain't that good. It's make them feel that what we have here over 22, 23 years, what we've engendered, what is manifested here with our friendship. Back to the 3 a.m. call. See, I like that term. This is what you get from the military, man. This is what you get. Yeah, you may not get a whole lot of money. I mean, not really, Matt. I mean, think about it, Brian. I mean, you're a surgeon, so you got extra cash. But for Matt and I mean, really, Lieutenant Colonel maybe when we were sort of popping a little bit, or at least to us, we thought, okay, yeah, I could do this. I can buy this new pair of sneakers. I got all my bills paid. I got nice furniture. But really, in retrospect, and I tell you from the corporate side, we didn't make jacket shit, But to us, probably at that right. So it ain't the money. Yes, the benefits are good with healthcare and so forth. But really, why you want to serve is so you can then go back one day, and God willing, you're still alive, and you could say, "Hey, I gotta go meet my old Army buddy." Remember that term, the old Army buddy?
Yep.
That's what we are. And it's like the old Army buddy that you've known for 50 years. That's what you get. And that's what in the Army need to figure out. And don't make it just by chance. For me, it was by chance. You and Brian, a little more deliberate, but me by chance. But the point being is that we have to explain to them that what we share here was because of that. It was because of that. It was because of the military, and somehow, if I could, and Brian, please, I know you can be more eloquent than me, but yeah, something I know you agree with me.
100%, George. And I think that I'm gonna focus on this point and then move back a little bit. Is we understand that now because we're older, and
Yeah.
we don't have some of the other distractions. We don't have some of the
Yes.
other possibilities of life that are in front of us as we pick and choose our careers. And now we know how incredibly meaningful that is. And our journey was our journey. And I think we got
Yeah.
our experiences, though different because we had different jobs. Our experiences, for the most part, were incredibly rewarding in real time. There wasn't
Yeah.
a lot of downtime in what we did. There wasn't a lot of, finger twirling like, well, this job sucks, it's boring, right? We lived in a time where we had our jobs were very consuming, but the end state is important to us. So where I'm going with this is what you said is incredibly powerful to you and I. Is how do we make that resonate
Yeah. Yeah.
with that 18-year-old, that
Yeah.
25-year-old, or that 32-year-old middle-level leader who's got a decision to make, right? And maybe that guy is beginning to get it, but how do we make what you're saying in a crystalline fashion? How do we make that resonate with those guys? The other
Yeah.
part that and Matt, I know that you've looked at the data, and I know that you know this at a depth that I don't. So please, jump in and say, well, here's what the data really says. I think when I started, what made me want to join the Army, I think the same thing will apply to kids today, and stay in the Army will apply, and that's that sense of team. Now, what's the sense of team to me isn't, and throughout my career, will not necessarily be the sense of team to others. And I'll use a sports analogy that we're all familiar with, right? And so a team for me that I was comfortable being in that structure was sort of like the way Belichick ran the Patriots, right? Well, now we know that the new players, they want to be on a team and they want to win, but they don't want that type of leadership. And so, Georgia's team is looking for a new coach. They pick a new coach that they think is going to be able to imbue that sense of team to a newer generation, looking at what they need. And so for leaders, this is what I think they need to do. One is find a way, and it ain't being the Army of one, right? Find a way to reach these folks because it's not just getting guys in, it's getting guys in and having the talent you want to stay, having them want to stay. And that is imbue them with a sense of team in a way that makes sense to them. And I think that requires leaders to be, one, incredibly transparent and honest, which is not something what we always did when we're looking at numbers and retention. The second thing is understand what works for you. And I think leaders get this. We understand, the leadership style that worked for me isn't going to work for this guy or that guy or that guy. So we have to develop things, right? We all know that. But yet I don't think we've made the leap in the same way in recruiting and retention. So look at and say, what was true in my Army may not be true now. And I'll use a specific thing in my field. When I came in, doing off-duty employment really wasn't well thought of. It was thought as being selfish. You're just doing it for the money, right? Hey, you owe the Army. The dependents need you to be available to them, and you can do that on your spare time, but we're not going to carve out any time during the day. Life has changed. In my field, if you just do your day job, you are not ready to go to combat and do your combat job. And doing that off-duty employment is important for you. Now, guys like doing it because they stay engaged, they get their skills up, maybe get a few bucks to make their lives better, right? But it isn't just about that. So I use this off-duty employment example as a way that you've got to change your thinking. Is what the people that you're trying to maintain, what's important to maintaining their skill sets, maintaining their why do I like this job, sort of the job satisfaction, and speaking to that. And that's going to change over time. And I think in each different field, it's going to be a little different, right? What's important to a shooter isn't going to be important to a comptroller. But we got to figure that out. Does that make sense, Matt?
No, listen,
Yep.
you motivated me on that shit. I think leadership needs to reread Prodigal Soldiers again, because we have to. We look at how we turned into an all volunteer army, and the issues that went in with that, and the back and forth with Congress and blah blah blah. But ultimately, is what Brian said, right? It was, how do you get the quality of humans in? You first of all can get the quality of humans in, and then secondly, within that percentage, how much can you retain, right? And how do you retain them? Because obviously sometimes it's a good experience to do 4 years, 3, 4 years, whatever, get out and then continue on something else. But like Brian's already mentioned, I think you mentioned, Matt, is yes, but when you leave, be an advocate, right? That's important. Obviously, we can't put that. But I think if you look at prodigal soldiers, and I'm not saying it's the end all be all, but if you look at prodigal soldiers, it ultimately comes down to, yes, and I wish the Skins had hired Belichick. I mean, I got it that he, maybe a different voice that the younger generation or whatever can't understand. I disagree. And not with you, Brian, but I disagree with the fact that we need to train on the combat mission. And as leaders, I wrote on my team in my first ODA, think war, but pray for peace, right? I mean, so I mean, when we go out to train, we train like we're going to go to war. Now, we weren't going to war then, but somehow, and I Brian was all over it, and he's obviously he's very eloquent. But the thing is that leadership, there's certain things. Yes, you have to change in how you approach people and how you reach people. I got all of that. But if we stick to the combat thing, whether we're in combat or not, if we stick to that's why we're doing it, and it's very clear why you need to, react to contact, knock out that bunker, because it all applies to this. If we go back to the old infantry drills, right? And that's important, man. And leaders have to tie that in. No, we're not out of here doing the crawl, walk, run, and all of that. And day, night, life, day, night blanks, day, night live fires. Because to fuck with you, we're doing it because we got to be prepared. Yep. And so somehow, I think, Brian, and please, contradict me or argue or whatever the point, or debate or whatever it is. But leadership, with respect to, like you said, the combat mission, has to be paramount, man. And we have to treat our troops. We have to give them the benefit of the doubt that they understand and can be intellectual in their pursuit. So I'll leave it at that.
No, George, I could not agree with you more. I think, that's the key component. It talks about being honest. It's like, hey, it's okay for you to do this and this and this, and we'll approach you from this way. But at the end of the day, it's all about, and again, the combat mission for a comptroller, a surgeon, a shooter, a logistician, they're different. And it isn't just being on the X. There's other ways that we impose national power, right, through the DOD. But at the end of the day, it's still a combat, or it's a national security mission. And we want to retain the people that understand that. And if someone says, I understand it, but I'm not interested in paying the price to live this lifestyle to support that, then to Matt's point, then how do we make sure when they go out, they go, hey, it wasn't for me, but this is a great job. I understand it. It might be for you, right? Or maybe they get out and they're a politician, or maybe they get out and they run a company, and then they support that ethos that you're talking about. But it doesn't make sense to keep somebody if they don't get that primary point is all of this is about doing the mission.
Yeah. Goddamn right. Yep.
And you said, Brian, you said earlier, Matt, throw out there if the numbers say something different, or if the numbers, we all know I'm a numbers guy. The first rule of numbers is you can always make them say whatever it is you want to say. I could always make them defend my point, right? So I won't throw the numbers out there. I won't even use them. What I will use is some of those phrases that you guys just said, which is the Army is ultimately here to be prepared to fight and win our nation's wars, right? So the things that we have been doing for years that slightly change with technology, and they slightly change maybe the location at which we need to do it and how often and the frequency at which we do it. But a lot of those things are the same. Brian, you said earlier about surgery hasn't changed so much since the Civil War. Then it was the beaches of Normandy. Then it was Afghanistan. Now it's the Indo-Pacific, right? We still need to keep our soldiers alive when they get wounded. The technology changes and the tyranny of distance changes slightly. So we have a new challenge. But what we're doing right now with the recruiting and retention challenges and some of the things that we're having right now, how are they any different than after Vietnam?
Yeah.
Maybe some of the numbers are a little bit different, but we struggled, didn't we? We created organizations.
That's why Prodigal Soldiers, Matt. That's why reread that book, man.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, so after Vietnam War, we struggled a lot. In the 90s, when we came into the Army, we were struggling with recruiting. I was laughed at. Like, people told me, "Why did you join the Army? You can't do anything else with your life?"
Yeah.
Right? In the early 90s. And so after that first Gulf War, we were struggling with recruiting. Then 9/11 happens. We're not struggling with recruiting anymore. We had to fend people off. We had people coming from the NFL. We had people from Major League Baseball that would come right to the military and serve with us. Right? And now we're post GWAT and we're struggling. How is it that much different? It's not that much different. Leaders have always had to find a way to inspire people. Leaders have always had to find a way to modify the team to make our team the type of team that people want to be a part of. They're called dynasties in sports for a reason. Dynasties don't last forever. And then the culture changes. And then you have to get a new coach. And then you got to bring new people in. Then you get new players, right? So that's, I just finished a podcast with Scott Brown, who talks about his 13 years at Vanderbilt and all of his 20-something years of, 25 years of being in college baseball. And what do they do every year, every couple of years? The culture's got to kind of modify. You've got new people that come to the team. And so these things are things that we've been doing for hundreds of years since the Civil War. And they're just a little bit different nowadays. And so that's what the numbers say. The numbers say is that it's not that much different. What last things do you guys got? Any advice for leaders? Advice just simply for Matt? What things do you guys have that you think people need to hear?
Hey, Matt, I'll start off. It's something that I failed to do. It's advice I give to every young surgeon and every young soldier when they ask me. And it's something as a leader I've tried to build in systemically to the organizations that I've led. But it's something that on a personal level, I continue to fail to do, and I recognize it. And that is, you have to bring balance into your life. You cannot be a good soldier, husband, father, whatever, wife, whatever, unless your life has balance. If it's all, when I was a young man, there was a book that I was given, and it was called The Three Boxes of Life. It talked about work, talked about education, and leisure. And about at different times of your life, those boxes get bigger, but really your goal is to kind of make those boxes similar size throughout your life and not let them get skewed at one point in time. And so I would say the advice I would give to leaders and soldiers is, one, find balance in your life. And if you're a leader, develop organizations that facilitate and promote your subordinates realizing that balance. And that's it. The other thing I would say is, for the young soldiers, contribute to your TSP.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, really, it's hard for me. I'm just going to add to some of Brian's stuff, because work-life balance, but I'm going to put this caveat in, is that don't use work-life balance to not do your damn job. All right. So you got to do your job, but it's got to be balanced. I know that's easier, and it's easier said than done. As we know, us three, the fact that we probably did more work than the life, because it was during very, very different times. But in the military, yes, that's a leadership responsibility, and it's a continuing education thing where you have to, as leaders, you have to walk that line of work-life balance, and Matt, I'll give you props again. I think you're very good at it. And I think the way you approach things is better than Brian and I. I think I'm better than Brian because we know he's a workaholic. But nevertheless, I think that You approach it in a much more educational way or collegial way than Brian and I. But as a leader, I can make excuses for Brian and I, but that's a leadership task, man, as far as I'm concerned. But you have to have it, but it's not, you can't go to the dictionary, you can't go to Gemini, get another plug to Google. You can't go to the AI platform and it's going to tell you about work-life balance. It'll give you a bunch of different stuff, but you got to figure it out. But in the military, I'm just going to stick to it. You need to understand your job is to, fight and win the nation's wars. So how do you get to work-life balance? There's plenty of opportunities, as we know, after 30 some years, plenty of opportunities, but leaders got to lead that. If that makes sense.
It's beautiful. And I'm so thankful for you two guys. B-Game, you're standing outside of a hospital. You're getting ready to go and work with some patients. I know there's some people in there that need your expertise here. So I'm going to let you guys go. But I am so thankful that you took these couple hours to share this with all the people that are going to learn from you guys. I've been learning from you guys the second half of my adult life. For the last 22 years, I've been learning from you guys. So I'm super thankful for everything that you've poured into me. These 2 hours are just a fraction of the amount of hours that you two guys have poured into me. I'm a better person because of you guys. I'm a better leader because you guys are in my life. I love you guys. Here is a sneak peek into our next episode with Mac Lawler.
While still doing company command, and I was like, okay, I can do all of those things, but I'm just going to have to apply to grad schools, and that's the next step for me. I had an awesome experience in the Army, did so much for my family. I always knew that I wanted to go to grad school down the road, maybe start my own business, but I wanted that skill set that an MBA and business school would provide me. And I knew eventually the Army was going to say, hey, shake my hand, say, hey, thanks for your service, go do your own thing now. I always thought about how important that transition is. I've seen guys get out of the Army without a great plan. My dad struggled with transition. So my dad played professional hockey for 13 years. He played in the NHL for 13 years, won a Stanley Cup. He was in his mid-30s, he retired, and he went from being a peak world-class athlete to making almost minimum wage working at Reebok, making shoes. And his line was always, you got to be smarter a lot longer than you need to be good at hockey.
Thanks for listening today. I hope we sparked some thoughts about the people that have inspired you to be who you are today. I hope you share some of your thoughts and better yet demonstrate them for the people in your life. Our pursuit is to get a little bit better every day. Progress equals small victories stacked on top of each other, building like compound interest. Keep stacking these positive habits like getting up early, working your butt off, learning something new, being positive, and surrounding yourself with phenomenal people. Please share your comments at the links in the show notes and DM us at Teach Me to Fish podcast on Instagram or Facebook. Looking forward to our next conversation.
Times don't fly too high. Be sure to keep the ground in sight. Fly forever if you keep it tight. Love the world, but keep the sky on your mind.